Joel Embiid is officially having surgery on that torn meniscus that we learned about at the end of last week. Comes, of course, in the middle of a career season. He could be done for the year. He could make a return for the playoffs. That's really the earliest he could be back is April. It's going to depend on whatever route they take for his recovery. Just a series of unfortunate moments for him if it's his entire career being set back 2 years due to injury.
Mm-hmm.
The consistent injuries that he's had since making his NBA debut. Some of the playoff shortcomings. Do you think he's the unluckiest player ever? And if not, who do you think that is?
I don't know about ever. I do want to give some context to how historic of a season this is first. Like you mentioned, he's going to have surgery soon. Best case scenario, an NBA insider has said 1 to 2 months is the best case scenario. I think that's ambitious. This is one of the greatest statistical cases in NBA history. We're going to do a quick trivia break here, Carson.
Let's go.
He has the 11th most points per game in a single season in NBA history. Can you name every player above him?
Yes, I can. All right, let's start with Wilt Chamberlain at 50.4, and then he's got like 4 other seasons above this. We have MJ scoring 37.1. We have Kobe at 35.4. We have Rick Barry at 35.6. We have James Harden at 36.1. We have Elgin Baylor, his 38 point per game season, and that's wraps.
That's the sweep, man.
Yeah.
He is one of 2 players to average 35 points per game and 6 assists per game. That's just him and James Harden. And he's only one of 3 players to average 35 points per game and 11 rebounds per game. That's just him, Wilt Chamberlain, and Elgin Baylor. It's a historic campaign. 35, 11, and 6. We have quite literally never seen anybody put up that stat line. It's the most efficient 35-point-per-game season ever, 64.5% true shooting percentage. That's 2.9% higher than the next closest 35-point-per-game season. That's just 2019 James Harden. And if you expand this to 30-point-per-game seasons, it's the 8th most efficient 30-point-per-game season ever. And you talk about his playoff shortcomings, Carson. He really has fixed his biggest flaws this season. We've talked about it in depth. Disgusting efficiency and volume from the mid-range. His shot has been on. He's scoring the most points per game from 15 to 19 feet in the NBA on 56.4% from the field. That's third field goal percentage-wise behind Halliburton and DeAndre Ayton. And he's shown great development as a playmaker. Decision-making out of double teams, consciously weaponizing his scoring to create shots for his teammates. It really is an unfortunate injury and one of the greatest seasons in NBA history, bar none. Mm-hmm. My question, I wonder if, and this is a freak injury, like this just, the circumstances, he just rolled up on it. Before we get into unluckiest player ever, I just want to ask you, Carson, do you think he needs to lose weight? Do you think like dropping 20 pounds would help the bear on his knee? It's always tough for big guys because big guys just inherently moving up and down the floor every possession. Yeah. It is really tough on their knees and on their body. Do you think dropping like 15 to 20 pounds would help Embiid?
I don't know, man. He wasn't this big coming into the league. He was probably 30 pounds lighter, and he missed 2 full seasons with foot injuries. Like, I think he's just one of those dudes whose body's just built to be injured.
I do think Embiid is one of the most unfortunate. I wouldn't say I wrote down 4 guys. Some injury concerns. Bill Walton, I would consider one after hitting his apex. Carson, he had 38 orthopedic surgeries in his career. That's ridiculous. I mean, foot, back, ankle, knee, constantly beat up. Greg Oden, Carson wrote a rap about Greg Oden.
Golly, man. Yeah.
And for him specifically, 3 microfracture surgeries in the same knee is just brutal. You just can't sustain that. Brandon Roy completely lacking cartilage.
Bro is just naming knees. Trailblazers. Bro is doing the name Trailblazers
and
game.
Then outside of injuries,
Sam Bowie, LaRue Martin if he had gotten his shot, Sidney Wicks if he had been in the right situation.
Yeah, I was getting there.
Then Jeff Petrie. Why didn't we ever see Jeff Petrie play longer? He actually was cut short by injury. The Blazers actually do have a pretty brutal injury history.
The only guy that I wrote down here that wasn't injury concerns was Jerry West, just because of the brutal circumstance that he lost the finals in.
Well, there's one guy a little bit unluckier than Jerry.
Yeah, Elgin Baylor, shout out. Jerry lost 7 NBA finals before winning an NBA title, and then 4 finals in Game 7. And then Elgin, I mean, retiring the season that you get the chip is just brutal.
Yeah.
So those are the guys I wrote down. But do you think that Embiid is the unluckiest player ever?
No, I don't see how anybody could be unluckier than Elgin Baylor. When you just consider the consistent individual dominance, right? 10 times first team All NBA. You mentioned Jerry lost 4 Game 7s in the finals. Elgin was there for every single one of them. He was 0-8 in the finals throughout his career. So he is the combination of so consistently being on the brink, being great individually, where it's not like you look at a lot of those series and you're like, oh boy, Elgin let them down. He had a run of 4 straight postseasons where he led the entire field in scoring. 2 of those included finals appearances. And he also had the devastating injury luck, where 65, he has a major knee injury. He's never quite the same, but he manages to get back to this superstar level. But then 1970, he tears his Achilles. He's basically done at that point. Then it's another major knee injury that causes him to retire in the season in which the Lakers, as you mentioned, would ultimately win the title. Like, I don't think anybody else is going to ever have that combination of terrible luck. I pray that nobody else ever does. The other guy who I wrote down is Steve Nash, for whom it's not a question of injury luck. Injury is a good way to look at it. Walton, I don't think anybody has ever like reached the apex and then just gotten their career destroyed by injuries like he did. But at least he got his ring, man. And then at least he got his second ring with 86 Celtics and he found a role for himself. That sucks. Of course, a lot of people talk about D Rose, his injuries derailing his career. But when I think about guys who were just consistently on the brink and just got screwed over by various factors, Steve Nash always stands out to me. There are other guys who were consistently great and didn't get their ring. Charles Barkley, of course. But he only had the team, like, probably in 1993. That was, like, kind of it. The Philly years, the supporting cast were weak. The Houston years, they were too old. Those Phoenix teams were really good, but that was just for a couple years, really. Karl Malone, of course, they were knocking on the door so many times, but Karl Malone folded. Karl Malone folded in the finals, so I can't really feel as bad for him. Nash got better in the playoffs often, and he just had to go through maybe the toughest that any individual conference has ever been. When you think about the Spurs and the Mavs of the mid-2000s, and then in the late 2000s, the Lakers, the early 2000s, the Lakers, when he was on the Mavs. And then he also has some terrible circumstances around him.
Yes.
03 Western Conference Finals, when he's with the Mavs, Dirk gets hurt versus the Spurs, who would go on to win the title. In the 06 season, he loses Amare Stoudemire, still wins 54 games, still makes them a great basketball team, still gets them to the Western Conference Finals, but is down one of his key guys. 2007, you have the famous bench clearing, suspensions to multiple key Suns. He lost to future champs in the Western Conference Finals 3 separate times, in 03 to the Spurs, in 05 to the Spurs, and in 2010 to the Lakers. Also lost to the
Game 7.
Yeah, also lost to the 06 Mavs, who were a great team that would ultimately lose in the finals, and lost to the future champion 07 Spurs, basically in the Western Conference Finals. Like, that's how everybody treated it. People treated that series like the NBA Finals because it was the Cavs coming out the other side. They didn't know that yet, but like those were the 2 best teams in basketball. So when I think of dudes who just consistently came up short and really you blame things around them, Nash stands out. Harden is the other guy who it's like, oh man, he never got a ring. But again, he didn't play up to his individual level. Still, when you consider the CP3 injury, when you consider the 27 missed threes, when you consider going up against the KD, Steph Warriors to begin with, like, there's no question that Harden got some real bad breaks.
I think Nash is a good pick too. Nash would definitely be on my short list.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, just never materialized, man.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Embiid is seemingly on this trajectory. And again, he does bear responsibility for most of his playoff shortcomings. Like, I don't just want to write that off as, oh, bad luck, because he hasn't been close to the player that we've seen in the regular season. A couple of those spots he has been banged up, though. Obviously, it looked early in his career like he might be one of those guys who's doomed to never be healthy, and he's overcome that in recent years, which has been encouraging. But he hasn't completely overcome that. He hasn't magically fixed his body, and I hope that he can maintain this level, because it starts to get scary when you're knocking on the door of 30 and you've had this many injuries. But, like, he got better again this year. He's the best that he's ever been. So I really hope that he doesn't join that unfortunate company, but we'll see. This was just a bummer for him during such a special season.